In this short video, I will explain to you how you can ingest your data into Microsoft Fabric. Because with Fabric and OneLake, there are a few different ways in which you can get data into your data lake. Now, OneLake is built on top of the suggestion that you should not be copying data if you don't have to. Because copying data takes time, is expensive in terms of compute. And why would you? Why can't you just link to a place where your data is stored? Now, if you're aware of Fabric and OneLake, you have probably read or seen things about shortcuts, mirroring, and data copy. And I will be handling all three of them right now in this video, because with these three techniques, you will be able to get all of your data into Microsoft Fabric in order to use it in your analyses in Power BI, machine learning, AI, and so on. We start with shortcuts. With a shortcut, you will just point OneLake to a location where data is stored. A shortcut will not copy data into OneLake. That means that OneLake just contains a pointer towards another data store. This is the absolute preferred way to go. Why? If you do a shortcut, you will not be copying data. There's no ETL process. There's no management of that process. There's no storage costs for you. So this is the best way to get data into Fabric, or I should say not getting data into Fabric, but it is the best way to access data from within Fabric. So shortcuts are the way to go. If your data source supports shortcuts, I would always suggest creating shortcuts. Now you can create shortcuts to all kinds of different data sources. They are listed here on the screen. And in this screenshot, you can see, among other sources, of course, within Fabric OneLake, you can shortcut to lake houses, you can shortcut to Azure Blob Storage accounts, but you can also shortcut to third-party providers, such as Amazon S3 buckets. So if your data, for whatever reason, lands into an Amazon S3, you can shortcut to that S3. Now, going into mirroring, what if your data source cannot be shortcutted into? Then we have to figure out a way to physically copy data from our source into OneLake. And this is where mirroring comes in, because mirroring makes it easy for you to do a no ETL process, but getting data into OneLake. With copy activities and copy jobs and so on, you have to write code, you have to manage a solution and schedule that in order to get data into OneLake. More on that later. But with mirroring, you don't have to manage that. Yes, we are still physically moving data from A to B, from an external source into Microsoft Fabric OneLake. However, it will be so easy to do because the source will actually make sure that your OneLake dataset is up to date. Now, mirroring is the most commonly used ingest mechanism when we are working with SQL Server databases as a data source, for example. We can mirror any other data source that is here on the screen in this screenshot right now, by the way, but in my company, we see it a lot with SQL Server data sources. If you have a SQL Server or an Azure SQL database, for example, and you want to get the data from that database into Microsoft Fabric, then given a few prerequisites that I can link to and I will show you here on the screen, you can mirror that database. And basically what's happening is that Fabric is subscribing itself to the transaction log of the originating database. Now, I will not bore you with all the technicalities. This is just a what do I pick type of video, but you will pick mirroring if your data source supports mirroring, but not shortcutting. With mirroring, as I said, Fabric will subscribe itself to all the transactions that are happening on the source database. So whenever a row is inserted, updated, deleted, and so on your source database, that same transaction will be replicated on your Fabric mirror. This means that yes, we are physically storing data in Fabric. That might cost you some money, but probably won't. More on that later. But you do not have to manage any ETL process. So this is actually quite cool. If you have a SQL Server database or an Azure SQL or anything other that is supported for mirroring, there is no ETL that you have to manage. Now, what are the costs for mirroring? It's quite easy. You get free mirroring storage up until the number of terabytes for the F-SKU that you have bought. So if you have an F2 capacity and you run mirroring on that, you get 2 terabytes of mirror database storage for free. If you run an F64, you get 64 terabytes and so on. This means that in most cases, mirroring will not cost you any storage bill. Now, if you go over, you will pay the regular OneLake storage that I believe at this point in time in the West Europe dataset in euros is about 2.2 cents per gigabyte per month or 22 euros per terabyte per month. So even if you go over that allowance that you get with your Fabric capacity, the storage is still quite cheap. Mirroring is quite cool. It is really, really fast. It is not real time, but it is near real time. usually we find that there is a second delay and not a minute delay, but even if it was a minute or a couple of minutes, that usually would be fine for my type of customers. Now, if your data source does not support shortcutting or mirroring, you have to fall back into copying data into Fabric. And there are a few different ways in which you can copy data. The first way is by writing a notebook. We would usually create notebooks if we are writing code to extract data out of an API. So for example, there is this REST API that's online that we have access to and we need data out of. We will write a Python notebook. We will connect to that REST API. We will capture the JSON response that we get and write that to the lakehouse. Now, this is a code-heavy solution that we need to manage. We need to schedule, we need to maintain and update and everything like that. But then again, if we cannot shortcut or mirror to that data set, this is what we can do. Another way of getting data is a copy job or a copy activity, and both can be scheduled through Fabric Data Factory pipelines. And again, this is a way in which we can copy data from a location to another location, and that can be a very good way to get data into OneLake in order to use it within your Microsoft Fabric workloads. However, here again, maybe it's not as code heavy as a notebook, but still it is a solution that we need to maintain and manage and schedule and so on. So there's work involved in actually running this data transfer, either through pipelines with copy activities, copy jobs, or through notebooks that we then schedule via a pipeline. Besides the obvious workload that we have as developers in creating and maintaining the solution, there is also the compute cost associated with the solution. So when you run a notebook, your Fabric capacity will consume compute unit seconds. When you run a copy activity in a pipeline, you will consume compute in your capacity. So this is not free. Now with mirroring, the compute is actually being handled by the source system, so that is free from the Fabric point of view. With shortcuts, there is no data transfer whatsoever, so there is no compute. And that makes it a really good case to start looking at shortcutting and mirroring. If you cannot do that, you have to pay for the compute on your Fabric side of things, and you can do notebooks, you can do copy jobs and copy activities. You could also do data flow Gen 2s, but I'm personally not really a fan of that. So to recap this video, when I try to get my data available in Fabric, and again, I'm not thinking about having all of my data physically present in OneLake. No, I don't care where my data is. I just want to use it in my Fabric workloads. I want to use it in Power BI. I want to use it in notebooks, in machine learning, in AI, data agents. I don't care where the data is physically. So I will do a shortcut if I can. I can shortcut to S3, to blob storage, and so on. If I cannot shortcut, I will be mirroring. So a SQL Server database, for example, I will put any day, I will put the on-premises gateway on that network, and I will start mirroring that database if I can. No compute costs, no management and maintenance and so on for the ETL solution. This is a zero ETL solution that you find yourself in, so that's amazing. And only if both of those options, shortcutting and mirroring, fail, I will be looking at how can I actually physically get my data in. If it's a REST API, I'll write some quick Python code to get the JSON responses into my lakehouse. If it's something else, I might look at copy jobs, copy activities. And perhaps if you're more of a low-code type of developer, you might be looking at Dataflow Gen 2s, where you get a what you see is what you get editor in order to actually connect to a data source and then store that data in OneLake. Thank you all. I hope you've learned something today. And if you did, press like on this video. And if you really like me, if you really want to send me some love, subscribe to my channel. You can find the subscription button right here on the screen. And I hope you subscribe so I can show you another video next week.